The champagne hit my collarbone before the words did, and for one absurd second I cataloged the temperature of it. Too warm.
I'm sorry.
Someone had left the tray too close to the terrace heaters before
you
I
to
understood
actually
that
hear me.
Adeline Voss had just emptied her glass down the front of my dress in front of 40 of her mother's board members. "I'm sorry," Addie said, in the voice she used for waiters. "I needed you to actually hear me." I heard her. The whole room heard her, because Addie Voss did not so much end a relationship as stage one, and she had chosen the 7th floor terrace of Halden Tower on the night of her mother's company gala to do it, with string lights overhead and a photographer from the business page working the crowd. 3 years I had folded myself around this woman's schedule, her moods, her mother's disapproval. 3 years of being the girl who waited in the car, who learned to like opera because she liked it, who took the later shift at the firm so I could pick her up from the airport. And she ended it holding another woman's hand. "This is Priya," Addie said, unnecessary, since Priya Anand's hand was laced through hers like it had grown there. "I didn't plan for it to happen like this. You planned the venue," I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt, which was its own small victory. "That takes at least a week." Someone near the bar laughed, quick and ugly, the kind of laugh that has an audience in mind. A man in a gray suit murmured to his date that the help shouldn't make scenes, and it took me a full 3 seconds to realize he meant me. That in this room I registered as staff who'd overstepped rather than a woman who had just been humiliated on purpose. I was 29 years old. I had a master's degree in structural preservation and a specialist's eye for load paths that my boss took credit for twice a year, and in this room I was invisible enough to be mistaken for a caterer. I found the ladies' room and blotted champagne out of silk with a paper towel that dissolved faster than my composure. In my coat pocket, where it always lived, my fingers found the brass spirit level my father left me, cool, familiar, heavier than its size, and I held it the way other people hold rosaries. "The strongest part of any building is the part nobody sees," he used to say, checking a bubble against a beam with his thumb, humming 3 notes with no words while he worked. I had built an entire adult life on believing that. I had just watched it fail to protect me from a public breakup timed for maximum witnesses. What I did not expect, walking back out onto the terrace to collect my coat and disappear with whatever dignity remained, was for the room to go quiet in a different key. Not laughing quiet, but the particular silence that follows a woman everyone is afraid of. Cassandra Voss crossed the terrace toward me, and nobody in her path moved slowly enough to be in the way twice. I had met her exactly 4 times in 3 years, always at a distance that felt intentional, always aware of her the way you're aware of weather. The press called her the woman who never blinks, and I had assumed that was a metaphor until I stood in front of her and understood it was closer to a warning. She was tall in the unhurried way of someone who has never needed to prove she took up space. Her scent reached me before her voice did, black cardamom and rain-wet slate, cold and exact, nothing wasted in it. "You're the one my daughter just discarded in front of my board," she said. Not a question. I prefer left publicly for a woman named Priya, but yes. Something moved at the corner of her mouth that wasn't quite a smile. 3 years with her, and you still have a sense of humor. That's either very stupid or very useful. I haven't decided which. Neither have I. She studied me the way I imagined she studied a balance sheet, not unkindly, just completely, missing nothing. Her eyes went once to the spirit level half out of my coat pocket, then back to my face, and I had the strange, precise sensation of being seen for the first time in longer than I wanted to admit. "My office," she said. "Tomorrow, 8 o'clock. Wear something you don't mind ruining." "Why would I ruin anything at your office?" Because I'm about to make you an offer you'll want to spit a drink over, and I'd rather it not be mine this time. She walked away before I could answer, and the whole terrace exhaled at once, and I stood there in a dress that smelled like a stranger's champagne holding my father's level, with absolutely no idea that I had just watched the last ordinary night of my life end. I almost didn't go. I want that on the record, whatever record a person like me gets to keep. I stood outside Halden Tower at 7:58 the next morning in the one blazer I owned that didn't have a coffee ghost on the cuff, and I thought about turning around 3 separate times. Then I thought about Junie's dialysis bill sitting unopened on my kitchen counter since Tuesday, and I went inside. Cassandra Voss's assistant walked me past a lobby model of a residential tower called Meridian Commons, 41 stories, glass and pale stone, the kind of rendering meant to make people feel wealthy just by looking at it. I stopped without meaning to. Something in the cantilevered east wing didn't sit right. The load transfer at the 11th floor routed through a column that the drawing showed thinner than it should have been for that span, and I said so out loud before I remembered I wasn't supposed to have opinions in this building. "That's not possible," said the junior engineer, trailing the assistant, already annoyed. "That elevation was signed off by inspection 8 months ago. Then either the drawing's wrong or the inspection was," I said, and traced the column with one finger without touching the model. "Look at the load path. It's not carried where the render says it's carried. Somebody's numbers don't match somebody's steel." The engineer went quiet in a way that told me I was right before he admitted it, and when I turned around, Cassandra Voss was standing at the top of the lobby stairs, watching, arms folded, and for the second time in 12 hours I felt the specific vertigo of being noticed. Her office was cold in temperature and warm in light, floor-to-ceiling windows facing east, a single framed photograph turned slightly away from the door so visitors couldn't see who was in it. She didn't offer me coffee. She offered me a folder. "My father built a clause into the family trust before he died," she said. "Control of Voss Group passes to a shareholder-appointed trustee unless I am lawfully bonded by my 45th birthday. I turn 45 in 6 weeks. Congratulations," I said. "I don't see what that has to do with me." "You will." She sat, folded her hands, watched me the way she'd watched the balance sheet. "I am asking you to marry me. Publicly, legally, bonded in the eyes of the trust and the board. I will clear whatever debt you're carrying, and you're carrying one. I can smell it on you, the way people smell of the thing they're afraid of losing. I'll advance your career at whatever firm will actually let you use your name on your own work. In exchange, you give me 11 months as my wife in front of people who are waiting for me to fail. You don't know anything about me. I know you correct engineers in lobbies for the pleasure of being right. I know you stood in that dress last night and didn't cry where anyone could see it. I know exactly what my daughter is, and I know you loved her anyway for 3 years, which tells me you're either a fool or extraordinarily loyal, and I have never once mistaken those for the same thing." She leaned forward. "I am not asking you to want me, Miss Calloway. I'm asking you to be seen wanting me. There's a difference, and I'll respect it completely." I should have said no. I sat in that cold, bright office with her scent settling into the air between us, cardamom, rain on stone, and thought about Junie's unopened bill and the invisible column in the lobby downstairs and Addie's laugh at the bar, and I said, "I want it in writing. Separate rooms. No expectations." "Done," she said, and something that might have been relief crossed her face before she put it away. "Sign at the bottom." I signed. 6 floors below us, in a lobby I would come to know very well, a flawed drawing sat inside a locked case with everyone's signature on it, but the truth's, and neither of us knew yet how much that column would eventually cost. The Voss residence occupied the top 4 floors of a building called the Aldermere, and the elevator alone took longer to reach it than the walk from my old apartment to the train. A man named Griggs, who managed the household staff and looked at me the way you'd look at a stain on good carpet, showed me to what he called the East Guest Suite, which was larger than every apartment I had ever lived in combined. "Madame Voss's wing is through there," he said, nodding at a set of doors with the flat disinterest of a man reciting a script he resented. "You will not need to go through there." I didn't, not for the first week. I learned the household in fragments, a security chief named Odell Marsh, who watched me for 3 days with the specific suspicion of a dog deciding whether to bite, and a housekeeper, Mrs. Adeline Reyes, who did not share his caution at all. She found me eating crackers over the sink at 10 at night because I hadn't wanted to ask anyone where the kitchen kept real food. And she made a sound of pure outrage and sat me down and fed me until I nearly cried into a bowl of soup. "Madam doesn't eat either when she's working," she said, like this explained something. 4 years now, since Miss Mara. Mara? Mrs. Reyes's face did something complicated. Her wife. You'll hear the name. Best you hear it from someone who loved her, too. I didn't push. I had learned, in 3 years with Addie, exactly how far you could push a Voss before the door closed, and I wasn't ready to find that edge with a woman I'd been married to for 4 days. The proof of care started small enough that I almost missed it. A dish of rye bread with caraway appeared at breakfast 2 days after I mentioned, once, in passing, that it was my favorite. My chamomile came with too much honey, the exact wrong right amount my mother used to make it, though I had no memory of telling anyone that. When I asked Mrs. Reyes about it, she just smiled and said Madam asked good questions and remembered good answers. The first real touch came at a photographer's insistence, 3 weeks in. At a groundbreaking for a community health wing Voss group was funding. Cassandra's cufflink caught on my sleeve as she adjusted my coat for the cameras, and her fingers grazed my wrist for 2 full seconds before she stepped back, and it should have meant nothing. It didn't feel like nothing. My scent must have shifted, warmed, because her jaw tightened and she looked away first, which I would later understand was rare enough to be its own kind of confession. Desmond Cade found me alone by the coffee table afterward. I knew him by reputation before I knew his face, vice chair of the board, 30 years at the company, the kind of man who called every Omega in the building sweetheart regardless of rank. He looked at my ring the way you'd look at a receipt you suspected was forged. "Quite the arrangement you've landed, Miss Calloway." He said my name like it cost him something. Contracts have fine print. So do people. I'd be careful reading either one too fast. "Is that a threat, Mr. Cade?" "It's advice." He smiled without warmth. Kept Omegas rarely get to keep the things they're kept for. I didn't tell Cassandra. I told myself it was nothing, a bitter old man protecting his own relevance, and I went home to the Aldermere and held my father's level in both hands, and did not yet understand that Desmond Cade had just told me, plainly, exactly what he intended to do. The board meeting that undid the first month of quiet was called on 11 hours' notice, which Odell told me was itself a kind of violence in that building. I wasn't meant to attend. I went anyway, because Cassandra had asked me to review the Meridian Commons drawings one more time the night before, and I'd found 4 more places where the steel didn't match the story the steel was supposed to be telling. "I move we revisit the validity of the marriage clause," Desmond said, given evidence the union was procured under financial duress. He set photographs of my apartment, my bank statements, Junie's hospital paperwork on the table like a hand of cards. A woman with $40,000 in medical debt marries a woman who can erase it in an afternoon. I don't call that a bond. I call it a bribe with a ring on it. The room's temperature dropped in the particular way rooms do when everyone is deciding whether to look at you. I felt my face go hot and then very still, the way it had on the terrace with Addie, and I thought, not again. Not here, too. Cassandra stood up so fast her chair rolled back a foot. "You will not speak about my wife's family in this room," she said, and her voice had gone somewhere I hadn't heard it go before. Low and flat and dangerous, in a way that had nothing to do with volume. Her sister's medical debt is not a scandal, Desmond. It's a mortgage her sister took on to survive a kidney condition, which you know because you had someone dig it up. If you want to discuss duress, let's discuss the trust clause my father wrote to control me from the grave. That's duress. This, she put her hand, briefly, over mine on the table, is the first thing I've chosen for myself in 4 years. The room went silent in the good way this time. I looked at her hand on mine and felt something crack open in my chest that had nothing to do with the meeting at all, because a contract does not require a woman to defend you like that. Nobody had defended me like that, not once, not in 3 years of Addie's careful, conditional love. That answer should not have warmed me. It did anyway. The motion failed, 11-4. Desmond gathered his folder without expression, but at the door he looked back at me, and there was nothing bitter old man about the look at all. It was patient. It was a man recalculating, not surrendering, and something cold moved under my ribs that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. 2 weeks later, Cassandra asked me to walk the Meridian Commons site with her, off the record, no engineers, no press. "You saw something in that lobby model the first day," she said, "and I want to know if I should be worried before I hand 100 families their keys." We were on the 11th floor, the one from the render, when the storm that had been threatening all afternoon finally broke, and the temporary elevator we'd taken up cut out with a lurch that sent dust sifting down from a beam I'd been eyeing since we stepped off. I got my level out of habit more than plan, set it against the beam, and watched the bubble drift dead to one side. "That's not settling," I said. "That's failing." The stairwell door we'd come through jammed on the far side, storm debris. We'd learn later. Nothing sinister, but neither of us knew that yet, and for 11 minutes we were alone on an unfinished floor 40 feet above a parking structure, with a beam groaning above us like something alive. "Talk to me," Cassandra said, close enough that her scent, cardamom and wet stone, cut through the concrete dust. Not about the building, about anything. "Why?" "Because your heartbeat is loud enough that I can smell the fear coming off you, and I'd rather you spend the next 10 minutes thinking about something other than that beam." So I told her about my father, checking levels on other people's houses for 30 years, and never once building himself one that wasn't rented. About the lighthouse at Callaway Point, where he taught me to read a blueprint before I could read a chapter book. Decommissioned now, boarded shut, the one thing I'd wanted my whole life and never had the money to save. She listened with her whole body angled toward me, and when the beam groaned again, she stepped between me and it without seeming to decide to. "You don't have to do that," I said. "I know." Her hand found mine in the dark, careful, asking a question with the pressure of it. "Tell me to stop, and I will." "Don't stop." The kiss, when it came, was not the beam's fault. It tasted like rain and felt like the first true thing either of us had done since I signed that contract, and when the crew finally forced the stairwell door and light spilled in, we broke apart like two people caught at something neither of us regretted. "This can't just be a contract anymore," she said, against my hair. And then the crew was there, and the sentence went unfinished, and I carried it around for days like a held breath. Mrs. Reyes bandaged the shallow cut on my palm from the dust and debris that night, while Cassandra sat across the kitchen table, watching with an intensity that made the housekeeper hide a smile. When Mrs. Reyes finally left us, Cassandra poured 2 glasses of something dark and didn't drink hers. Mara died on a site like that one, she said, without preamble, the way people say the hardest things when they've decided to stop protecting themselves from saying them. A scaffolding collapse 4 years ago at a Voss building my father was still shadow running from his sickbed. The inspection reports said the rigging was rated for double the load it was carrying. I believed the reports. I buried my wife believing the reports. Cassandra, I have spent 4 years making Voss Group the safest builder in this state because I couldn't save her, and tonight I watched a beam groan over your head in the same company's tower, and I understood I might not have fixed anything at all. I might have just made the lie more careful. I put my bandaged hand over hers. Then we find out which. She turned her hand over to hold mine properly and told me the rest. Her father's doctrine: sentiment is a liability, control is the only inheritance that doesn't rot, drilled into her from the time she could walk, and how she'd spent her whole adult life mistaking that iron for strength until a woman in a champagne-stained dress corrected an engineer in her lobby and made her wonder, for the first time in years, what she'd actually been protecting. I presented at 14, I told her, my own scar, offered because hers had been offered first. My mother cried. Not happy crying. She said an Omega daughter was one more mouth the world would underpay. I spent 15 years trying to be too competent to be underpaid anyway. It didn't work. It just made me easy to overlook in a new way. I don't overlook you, Cassandra said. I haven't been able to since the lobby. We sat with that a long time, her thumb tracing slow circles over my knuckles, the tension between us gone warm and unbearable and entirely undiscussed, until Odell knocked hard enough to crack the moment open. Ma'am, you need to see this. His face, usually unreadable, had gone gray. Desmond's filed a complaint with the state licensing board. Structural falsification. He's named Miss Calloway. The complaint alleged, in careful lawyer language, that I had altered the Meridian Commons reports myself to manufacture a crisis and pressure Cassandra into deeper dependence on me, that the flaw I'd found wasn't real fraud, but my own fabrication, a con from the start. My license was suspended within 48 hours pending review, which meant I couldn't legally set foot on a job site, which meant every word I'd said about that 11th floor was now, on paper, worthless. Then Junie called, crying, to tell me her insurance had been abruptly flagged for billing irregularities by a review board that had never once questioned her claims in 3 years of treatment, and that dialysis was on hold until it cleared. That's not a coincidence, Cassandra said, already on the phone with her legal team, her voice gone to iron. That's Desmond reaching into a hospital's billing system, and I want to know how. The company's lawyers, cautious and cold, advised her to distance herself from me publicly until the licensing review concluded, a temporary statement, they said, for optics. For the board vote in 3 weeks, nothing that meant anything. Cassandra argued for an hour. In the end, she issued it anyway. 4 sentences confirming the marriage remained legally valid while declining to comment on personnel matters under review. And reading it online at midnight, alone in the East Guest Suite, it felt exactly like being handed a definition of myself I hadn't agreed to. I packed a bag before dawn. Griggs didn't stop me. Nobody did. My old apartment still smelled like nobody had lived there in 2 months. I sat on the floor with the box of things I hadn't unpacked and held my father's level in both hands until my knuckles ached, and thought about the word placeholder and how thoroughly I seemed built for that role no matter who was doing the choosing. Junie texted that the hospital had reinstated her for now, under protest, no explanation given. I didn't know yet that Cassandra had personally wired the balance to make the irregularity disappear before her lawyers even finished their sentence. I only knew the woman who'd said, "This can't just be a contract anymore," had let a press release do her talking instead. I stayed away 4 days. On the 5th, I stopped feeling sorry for myself long enough to get angry, and anger, it turns out, is a far better engineer than grief. I still had the 11th floor data on a drive Desmond hadn't thought to seize. Because it had never been in the company's system, I'd run my own numbers, off the books, the way my father taught me to trust nothing I hadn't checked myself. I spent 2 days matching it against archived inspection filings from 4 years back, the ones from the night Mara Voss died, and found the same signature on both sets of falsified reports, an inspector named Holloway, long since retired onto a very generous Voss Group pension that Desmond, records showed, had personally approved. I called Frankie first, my oldest friend and the only person at my old firm who still returned my calls. I need someone who still has building department access and doesn't ask questions. You need someone who asks exactly the right questions, Frankie said. Also, you sound unhinged. I'm coming with a laptop and bad coffee. Between the two of us and a night that ran until 4 in the morning, we built a paper trail that ran unbroken from Holloway's fraudulent sign-off on Mara's scaffolding to the current fraudulent sign-off on Meridian Commons' 11th floor, with Desmond's approvals stitched through both like a seam. I drove to the Aldermere at 6 a.m., and Odell let me up without a word, which told me everything about where his loyalty had finally landed. Cassandra was in the kitchen, hollow-eyed, like she hadn't slept since the press release. "You came back." "I came back with proof," I said, and put the drive on the counter between us like a declaration. Desmond didn't just falsify Meridian Commons, he falsified the report that killed Mara, same inspector, same signature 4 years apart. "He's been buying silence on your father's dime, and yours ever since." She went very still, the particular stillness of a person absorbing a blow they'd been braced for without knowing it. "Show me." We took it to the board that afternoon, unannounced, and Desmond, cornered in front of the same 12 people who'd nearly believed his story about me, made the mistake of every villain who has never once been told no. He panicked instead of folding. He lunged for the drive on the table, and when Odell blocked him, he shoved past hard enough that I stumbled into the credenza, and Cassandra was between us before I'd even finished falling, taking the second shove meant for me across her own shoulder, sending a water pitcher shattering to the floor. "Touch her again," she said, not loudly, "and I will make sure the only thing left of your name is the case file." Cassandra. I caught her wrist before her hand could close into the fist it was already becoming. Desmond, pale and cornered and finally, truly afraid, had gone still against the wall with security closing in on either side. "Don't. Let the truth do it. He's not worth what it would cost you to be the one who breaks him." She looked at me for a long moment, chest heaving, and then the fury banked itself back down into something colder and far more precise. "Call the police," she told Odell. And legal, every filing, every falsified date, starting with Holloway's signature 4 years ago. They led Desmond out through the same lobby, where I'd once corrected an engineer over a scale model, past the same board members who'd almost believed his lies, and not one of them looked away from watching it happen. The press conference, 6 days later, drew more cameras than the gala that had started all of it. Cassandra stood at the podium and laid out the fraud in full, Holloway's falsified inspections, Desmond's decade of buried maintenance funds skimmed from buildings full of families who trusted the Voss name, The direct line from those lies to Mara Voss's death on a Voss Group site. She did not soften a single fact for the cameras. When a reporter asked about the personnel matter involving her wife, Cassandra said, "My wife is the reason we caught him. Her license will be reinstated by end of week, and I'd like the record to reflect she solved in 4 days what my company's own inspectors missed for 4 years." Addie found me afterward, in the hallway outside the conference room, twisting her hands the way she used to before an apology she didn't want to make. "I heard what he tried to do to you. I should have. I know I hurt you. That night. I didn't know it would open the door for someone worse to hurt you too." She looked, for the first time in 3 years, genuinely young. For what it's worth, my mother hasn't looked at anyone the way she looks at you. Not since before I can remember. "Thank you," I said, and meant it, and understood that I no longer needed her apology the way I once would have. Cassandra found me by the window a few minutes later, my license reinstatement letter still in my hand. "I have a question," she said, "and it isn't a business one this time. Ask it." "Ask me with your words," she said instead, echoing the stairwell, the storm, everything unfinished between us, and stepped close enough that her scent wrapped around mine, cardamom meeting marigold, warming both at once. "Tell me you want this to stop being a contract, or tell me to stop asking, and I will respect either answer completely." "I don't want you to stop," I said. "I never have. I just didn't think I was allowed to say so." She kissed me there in the hallway, unhurried, certain, and when she drew back her hand, found the scent gland at the side of my neck, thumb resting there, not pressing, only asking. "Say it," she murmured. "Tell me you want the bond, not the paper. Tell me with your words, and I will make it true." "I want the bond," I said. "I want you. Not the 11 months, all of it." The bite, when it came, was gentle and certain, and nothing at all like the cold contract I had signed 6 weeks earlier, and the bond that opened between us afterward felt less like something new than something confirmed, a load finally carried where it had always belonged. We were married again 4 months later, properly this time, in front of people who had actually earned the right to watch. Junie walked me down an aisle strung with marigolds because I'd once mentioned, that I loved them, and Cassandra had remembered. Mrs. Reyes cried through the entire ceremony. Odell, standing at Cassandra's shoulder in a suit that clearly pained him, told me afterward, gruffly, that in 15 years he had never once seen his employer wait for anyone, and that he supposed I was worth the waiting. In her vows, Cassandra used my father's line without my ever having taught it to her twice. "The strongest part of any structure is the part nobody sees holding it up," she said, holding both my hands. I spent 4 years believing that meant control. "You taught me it means you. It has always meant you." Desmond Cade was sentenced 11 months later to 9 years for fraud and negligent homicide in Mara's death, and the pension board clawed back every dollar Holloway had ever been paid to lie. Voss Group established the Mara Voss safety standard across every property it owned, with my name on the founding audit. Meridian Commons opened a year late and fully sound, its 11th floor column exactly as strong as the drawings finally claimed. On our first anniversary, Cassandra handed me a deed instead of flowers, Callaway point light, restored structurally sound, a brass plaque by the door, reading for the woman who checks everything twice. We stood in the lantern room at sunrise, her hand at my waist, my father's level resting level and true on the windowsill for the first time in 15 years, and I understood, finally, that being overlooked had never been a verdict on my worth. It had only ever been proof that the people looking hadn't known where to find what mattered. Some women spend their lives being chosen last and mistake it for being unchosen entirely. I know now that the last name called is sometimes only the truest one, said by the one voice that was never going to get it wrong. The end.